We don't know in Nancy's case if this is just targeted to her or if because they failed to get a ransom, they could try again.
There is a gas station a few blocks from Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni's house in Tucson. Not near Nancy's house, near theirs. And inside that gas station, there is a Bitcoin ATM. The kind where you walk in, feed cash into a machine, and walk out with cryptocurrency in a wallet that nobody can trace back to you. The ransom notes that arrived after Nancy Guthrie disappeared demanded Bitcoin. The FBI visited that gas station, not the one near Nancy's house in the Catalina foothills, the one near her daughter and son-in-law. I want you to hold that detail while I show you something else. Something that has been sitting on a kitchen counter in this case since the first morning. Something so simple and so devastating that once you see what it means, that the entire framework this investigation has been built around for over 2 months comes apart. Nancy Guthrie's heart medication was on that counter, untouched. The dose was due at 10 o'clock at night. Tommaso dropped her off at 9:50. The sheriff confirmed on camera that she could not survive 24 hours without it. And the people who took her left it right there. If you are kidnapping someone for ransom, if the entire plan depends on keeping that person alive long enough to collect a payment, you take the medication. You do not need to know what it is. You do not need to understand cardiology. You see bottles on a counter and you take them. 5 seconds. They were already in the house. They were already taking her. And they left the pills behind. That single detail, a pill bottle on a kitchen counter, tells us more about what really happened inside that house than 60 days of press conferences. Because it tells us that keeping Nancy Guthrie alive was never the plan, which means the ransom was never the motive, which means everything this investigation has been built on since Cameron Guthrie said the words kidnapping for ransom on the very first phone call is the wrong framework entirely. This video is going to show you what killed the ransom theory, and what the evidence points toward when you take that theory off the table. Before we proceed, please, I want you to leave whatever you are doing right now and drop a prayer of faith for Nancy Guthrie. Your prayers might be the key to bringing her home. Amen. When Annie called Savannah in the early hours of February 1st and told her Nancy was gone, Savannah did what most people would do. She panicked. She called the hospitals. She called her brother Cameron. And Cameron, who spent his career in military intelligence, who is trained to read situations quickly and cut to the most probable explanation, said immediately that he believed their mother had been kidnapped for ransom. That assessment made sense in the moment. Nancy could not walk far. She had not wandered off. Her things were inside. The back doors were propped open. Someone had been there and taken her, and Cameron knew that his sister Savannah was a nationally recognized NBC anchor with a reported net worth that made the family a viable target for someone with that kind of criminal ambition. Now, from that first phone call, the ransom framework became the lens through which everything in this case was examined. The family's public statements were built around it. Savannah's video messages to the kidnapper, the $1 million reward, the responses to the ransom notes. All of it operated on the assumption that someone had taken Nancy Guthrie to collect money from her famous daughter. But assumptions built in the first hours of a crisis are not always correct. And the evidence that has accumulated over 60 days points in a direction that the ransom framework cannot explain. Not one detail of it, multiple details of it. Starting with the most obvious one that has been sitting untouched on a kitchen counter this entire time. Let us be precise about what we know. Nancy Guthrie takes daily heart medication. The sheriff confirmed publicly that without it, she could not survive 24 hours. Forensic experts reviewing the case have assessed her likely survival window without the medication at no more than 72 hours under the best conditions. She is 84 years old with a pacemaker and limited cardiac function. The medication is not optional. It is the difference between her being alive or not. On the morning of February 1st, when investigators arrived at her home, those pills were on the kitchen counter, exactly where she would have left them for her 10 o'clock dose, exactly where they would be visible to anyone who walked through that house. Not hidden, not locked away, on the counter, in plain sight. Now think through the logic of a kidnapping for ransom from the perspective of the person executing it. Your entire plan depends on one thing: keeping the hostage alive long enough to collect the payment. A dead hostage is worthless. A dead hostage means no leverage. No leverage means no money. No money means you risked everything for nothing. The hostage's survival is not a secondary consideration in a ransom operation. It is the primary one. Everything else is secondary to keeping that person breathing. So you are inside Nancy Guthrie's home at 2 in the morning. You have spent weeks preparing this operation. You have neutralized the cameras. You have staged the entry points. You are executing a plan that required 3 weeks of surveillance and detailed knowledge of this property. You reach the kitchen. You see pill bottles on the counter. You know you are taking an 84-year-old woman. You understand that elderly people take medication for a reason, and you leave the bottles behind. That does not happen. Not in any documented ransom case. Not in any rational version of a kidnapping for financial gain. You take the pills because without them, your hostage dies and your leverage disappears. The only explanations for leaving that medication behind are that the person who took Nancy did not understand what they were looking at, which contradicts every other indicator of sophisticated planning in this case, or that keeping Nancy alive was never part of the plan. And if keeping her alive was never part of the plan, then the ransom was never the motive. The ransom notes were something else. A layer placed over this crime to make it look like something it was not. A story built on top of a reality that is far more disturbing than a stranger abduction for money. The medication on that counter is not a minor oversight in an otherwise well-planned operation. It is the evidence that the operation was never designed to keep Nancy Guthrie alive. And once you accept that, everything about this case has to be reread from the beginning. The Ozark Trail 25-liter backpack has been discussed in this case since the first FBI footage release. The reflective strips, the Walmart exclusivity, the purchase trail investigators were running. But the shape of that bag, what it looks like when the suspect is wearing it and moving, has not been examined the way it deserves. Watch the doorbell footage when the suspect leans forward to cover the camera lens. A bag carrying heavy equipment. Restraints, zip ties, or tools, anything with weight and rigid edges, shifts and pulls when the body tilts forward. The load moves. The center of gravity changes. You see it in how someone adjusts their balance. That bag does not behave that way. It is full, but it sits evenly. No pull to one side, no adjustment of balance when he leans. The weight is distributed the way light compressible material distributes weight. Something flat, something folded, something that fills the space without adding significant mass. Now ask yourself what you bring to a kidnapping for ransom versus what you bring when the person is not coming back alive. For a living hostage, you need restraints, something to secure them during transport. Zip ties, duct tape, a blindfold, items with weight and edges that would shift in a bag when the body moves. For a body, you need covering material, a tarp, a sheet, something to wrap around a person so that transfer evidence, blood, biological material, does not contaminate the vehicle or your clothing. The shape of that backpack is consistent with flat, folded fabric. Not a kidnap kit. Not the tools of captivity. The tools of removal. And if you are carrying removal equipment rather than captivity equipment, you already knew before you arrived that Nancy Guthrie was not going to need to be held anywhere. She was going to need to be wrapped and transported, and that was the end of it. 2 pieces of evidence: the medication left behind, the backpack shaped like a tarp, both pointing in exactly the same direction. This was never about keeping Nancy alive. Savannah Guthrie told the country the back doors were propped open when Annie arrived that morning. Ashley Banfield confirmed through her law enforcement source that the doors were propped using Nancy Guthrie's own flower pots from her own patio. 3 access points: the back kitchen door, the back patio door, the side gate near the garage. All three held open using pots that were already on that property. Pots that were grabbed in the dark, positioned without hesitation, used as tools by someone whose hands reached for them and found them exactly where they expected. Think about what that requires at 2 in the morning. You arrive at the back of a property in complete darkness. You need to prop open a door so it stays accessible during the operation. You do not bring your own prop because you already know there are pots on the patio. You know their approximate size and weight. You know they are heavy enough to hold a door without sliding. You know where they are positioned relative to each door. You reach for one and it is there. That is not the knowledge of someone who walked around this property one time on a reconnaissance mission and made mental notes. That is the knowledge of someone for whom this patio was familiar. Someone who had been on it enough times that the placement of the flower pots was part of their background awareness. The way you know where the furniture is in your own home without turning the lights on. And then consider the operational logic of propping 3 separate access points. The back kitchen door, the back patio door, the side gate. That is a planned corridor. A pathway from the street through the side gate into the backyard through the back doors and into the house. Someone mapped that route before the night of February 1st. Someone walked it in their mind, or in person on a previous visit, and identified exactly which points needed to be held open and exactly what was already on that patio to hold them with. This is not the operational planning of a stranger who cased the property from the outside. A stranger looking through binoculars from the street cannot see which flower pots are on a back patio or how heavy they are. That knowledge lives inside the property. It belongs to someone who has been on that patio, who has stood there in daylight and absorbed the layout the way familiar places are absorbed, without effort, without intention, just through the ordinary repetition of being there. Every night before bed, Nancy Guthrie removed her hearing aids. She needed powerful ones. Without them, she was functionally deaf, unable to hear conversation at normal volume, unable to hear commands given in the dark at 2 in the morning by someone standing over her bed. Think about what happens when someone enters a bedroom in the dark and gives a verbal instruction to a person who cannot hear them. Get up. Come with me. Do not make a sound. The person in the bed does not respond, not because they are resisting, because they literally cannot hear the words being spoken. They may not even know someone is in the room until they feel a hand on them. That gap between the command given and the response that does not come creates a moment of confusion and then frustration. And frustrated people under pressure in the dark make unplanned physical contact, a grab that is too hard, a push that sends someone into a nightstand or a doorframe, a movement that produces blood where the plan called for none. The blood at the front entrance is not consistent with a planned exit route. It is consistent with an injury that happened during the removal process, an injury that was not supposed to happen. That was not part of the plan. That turned a clean operation into one that left evidence on a porch that was supposed to be spotless. And the hearing aids explain something else that has puzzled this investigation. The house was described by a law enforcement source as immaculate. No overturned furniture, no broken objects, no evidence of a struggle anywhere inside. The only physical disturbance was the blood at the exit point. If there had been a violent confrontation inside the bedroom or anywhere in the interior, that immaculate description would not hold. What the physical evidence describes is a removal that was mostly controlled, someone who moved through the house with familiarity and did not disturb anything, until the exit when something went wrong. The hearing aids were in the house the next morning. Nancy did not have them when she was taken, which means the person who took her may not have known she was deaf without them, may not have anticipated that their verbal commands would go unheard, may not have planned for the possibility that an 84-year-old woman could not comply with an instruction she genuinely could not hear. It's that gap in the operational knowledge, knowing the camera positions, knowing the flower pots, knowing the Saturday night routine, but not knowing about the hearing aids, tells us something specific about the source of the intelligence behind this operation. Someone who had access to the external details of Nancy's life and home, but perhaps not to the private details of her bedroom routine. The kind of details that a person who visits regularly would know. The kind that a person who had never been in her bedroom at night would not. Nancy Guthrie's front entrance had a heavy iron security gate. A neighbor who has the same model described it directly and on record. You cannot break through that gate from the outside. You are never getting through it by force. It is not a lock that yields to a pick or a door that gives to a kick. It is a barrier that requires someone on the inside to release it. The man on the doorbell camera footage was standing outside that gate, not trying to force it, not working at a lock, standing, waiting. And then at some point, the gate opened, not because he forced it, because it was opened from the inside or had already been made accessible before he arrived. That single physical fact eliminates the possibility of a lone outside actor executing this crime without interior assistance. The gate cannot be breached from outside by one person. And the man on the porch did not breach it. He went through it because someone or something on the inside made that possible. Either someone was already inside that house before the man on the porch arrived, someone who opened the gate from the interior, or the gate had been deliberately left unsecured earlier in the evening by the last person who was inside the property before the crime began. The last person who stood at that gate and had the opportunity to leave it in a specific condition before driving away. Tommaso Cioni walked Nancy to her door at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st. He says he watched the garage door close and confirmed she was safely inside. Whether the front security gate was locked or left accessible at that moment is a question this investigation has never answered publicly. But it is the question that the physical evidence of the gate, impassable from the outside, opened somehow from the inside, demands be answered. A stranger planning this operation from the outside has no solution to that gate. They cannot get through it by force. They cannot pick it. They cannot buy a key to it. The only solutions are an insider who opens it or an insider who leaves it accessible. Both solutions point to the same place. Someone who was inside that property on the evening of January 31st and made a specific decision about that gate before they left. Now bring together the geographic details that have been appearing in this case individually and have never been assembled in one place. The gas station with the Bitcoin ATM is blocks from Annie and Tommaso's house, not near Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills. They're near the home of the last people confirmed to have seen her alive. And that gas station sits on the route between their house and Nancy's house, the route that Tommaso drove on the evening of January 31st to drop Nancy home. Anyone who makes that drive regularly would know every business on that route, would know what services are available, would know that a machine inside that gas station accepts the same cryptocurrency the ransom notes demanded, the Google search. On January 11th, the same night investigators believe the suspect may have been conducting physical surveillance at Nancy's front door. Someone searched Nancy Guthrie's home address online. That search originated from Tucson, not another state, not through a privacy network. Tucson, the same city where Annie and Tommaso live 4 miles from Nancy's front door. The digital reconnaissance and physical reconnaissance converging on the same target on the same night from the same city. Derek Kayla, the man arrested for sending a ransom-related text message in connection with this case, sent that text not to Savannah Guthrie in New York, not to the FBI tip line, not to any public channel. He sent it to Tommaso Cioni's personal cell phone, a private number, the kind that does not circulate publicly, the kind that exists inside a social network. Kayla has documented connections to the Tucson music scene, the same scene that Tommaso Cioni has been part of for nearly 2 decades through his band. You reach a personal number because you are close enough to the person to have it. The February 11th ransom note. A third party contacted TMZ claiming to have information about the kidnapping. And that note claimed the sender had attempted to reach family members directly before going to the media. The family members they named were not Savannah. They were Annie and Cameron, the two siblings who were in Tucson, closest to the situation on the ground, closest to the geographic center of this investigation. Why would someone with real information about a kidnapping contact the siblings in Arizona rather than the one in New York with the platform and the money? Unless they understood that the relevant information was not in New York. It was in Tucson. Annie's car was held by investigators for more than 40 days, subjected to what reporting described as an exhaustive search before being returned to the family. 40 days of forensic examination of a vehicle is not routine processing. It means investigators were looking for something specific. Transfer evidence, biological material, anything that might place a specific person or a specific cargo in that vehicle during a specific window of time. The car was returned. What the search produced has not been made public. And now there are photographs showing vehicles at Nancy's home with people removing items in boxes. Before she has been declared dead. Before a death certificate has been issued. Before the investigation has formally closed. Items leaving a property that is still at the center of an active missing persons case raise a question that deserves a direct public answer. The Bitcoin ATM near Annie and Tommaso's house. The Google search from Tucson on the same night as the physical surveillance. The ransom text sent to Tommaso's personal phone. The February 11th note addressed to Annie and Cameron. The car held 40 days. Every geographic data point in this case returns to the same 4-mile radius, not Nancy's neighborhood, the neighborhood where the people who last saw her alive go home at night. The first ransom notes arrived on February 2nd and 3rd, 1 and 2 days after Nancy disappeared. They demanded $4 million in Bitcoin by February 5th at 5 in the afternoon. If that deadline passed, the price would rise to $6 million by February 9th. A functioning Bitcoin wallet address was included. The notes were structured, formatted, they're written with what Harvey Levin described as sophisticated vocabulary. Those notes contained something that should have stopped every conversation about outside perpetrators in its tracks. Specific non-public details about the crime scene, the exact location of Nancy's Apple Watch inside the house, a detail that had not been released to the public, damage to a specific floodlight on the property, a detail that had not been released. Information that only someone who had been inside that house on the night Nancy was taken would possess. You cannot guess where an Apple Watch is sitting inside a home you have never entered. You have to have seen it there. Either the person who wrote those notes was present during the crime, close enough to observe those specific details, or they received that information from someone who was. There is no version of those notes that involves a complete stranger with no connection to the property. Then consider the notes themselves in terms of behavioral profile. The first notes are cold and transactional. Deadlines, escalating demands, the language of control. Then Savannah revealed in her Today Show interview that one note read almost like an apology. The sender expressed something resembling guilt, said they did not realize Nancy was so fragile, did not know her heart was that weak. 60 years of documented ransom cases do not contain a single precedent for a kidnapper sending an apology to the victim's family, explaining that the victim's medical vulnerabilities were unexpected. It has never happened because the psychological profile required to take an 84-year-old woman from her bed in the dark does not produce guilt letters to her children. The emotional architecture required for one does not coexist with the emotional architecture required for the other. The apology note was not written by a kidnapper who felt remorse. It was written by someone who needed the family to stop asking certain questions, to accept a narrative of accidental death during a botched stranger operation rather than deliberate action by someone known to them. It was designed to redirect grief, to provide emotional closure that pointed away from the people closest to Nancy and toward a fiction that no longer required investigation. And then there is the proof of life problem. The first ransom deadline was February 5th, 4 days after the abduction. In every documented kidnapping for ransom where the hostage is alive, proof of life is established immediately. A phone call, a photograph with that day's newspaper, a voice recording. Something that creates urgency, because urgency is leverage. Something that demonstrates the commodity the kidnapper is selling is still viable. These notes produced deadlines but never produced proof of life. Not one photograph, not one recording, not one piece of evidence that Nancy Guthrie was breathing when those demands were written. The family responded. They made videos. They announced the reward. They did everything a family responding to a real ransom demand would do, and nobody collected. The deadlines passed. The notes stopped. The Bitcoin wallet sat untouched. A ransom note with a functioning Bitcoin address and a payment deadline is not written after the hostage is already gone. The infrastructure exists. The account was real. But nobody ever activated it to collect because collecting would require maintaining a living hostage who was never part of the plan. A law enforcement source confirmed to News Nation that the interior of Nancy Guthrie's home was immaculate. That was the word used. Immaculate. No overturned furniture, no displaced objects, no broken glass, no evidence of a physical struggle anywhere inside the residence. The only evidence of a crime was the blood at the front entrance and the back doors propped open with flower pots. An immaculate house tells you something specific about the person who moved through it. They did not search. They did not open drawers looking for valuables. So they did not fumble in the dark, trying to find a bedroom they had never been in. They went directly to where they needed to go, and they did not disturb anything along the way. The precision of that movement, the absence of any evidence of confusion or exploration, is the behavioral signature of someone for whom that house was not unfamiliar territory. Strangers who break into homes leave evidence of their navigation. Wrong turns, opened doors to rooms they did not need. Objects moved when someone reaches for something and misjudges the distance in the dark. The immaculate interior of Nancy Guthrie's home after a nighttime forced removal of an elderly resident suggests someone who did not navigate that house, someone who moved through it. And the only disturbance, the blood at the front entrance, occurred at the exit point, not inside. And not in the bedroom where the removal began, at the front door, where the hearing aid problem had already created an unplanned physical contact, where an injury that was not supposed to happen left the only physical trace of what happened inside that house. An immaculate interior and a bloody exit. The interior tells you who was there. The exit tells you what went wrong. Together they describe someone who knew that house and was undone not by the difficulty of the operation, but by a detail they had not anticipated. A small, quiet, private detail. An 84-year-old woman's hearing aids sitting in a bowl beside her bed. Tommaso Cioni dropped Nancy Guthrie at her home at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st. He says the garage door closed behind her. That is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie alive. And the next confirmed event is Annie Guthrie calling to report Nancy missing. Not at 6 in the morning when a concerned family member might check on an elderly parent who lives alone. Not at 8, not at 9. Sometime around noon the following day. 14 hours. 14 hours between the last confirmed sighting of an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, limited mobility, and daily heart medication, living alone in a desert house in the Catalina foothills. And the first phone call from her family to check on her. Her daughter Annie lives 4 miles away. A 10-minute drive. 14 hours passed without a call, without a text, without a drive-by. Without any of the ordinary maintenance of contact that most families sustain with an aging parent who lives alone. And that window, 14 hours of silence from the people who live closest to her is enough time to drive to the house, execute whatever happened inside, transport whoever needed to be transported, and return home before sunrise. It is enough time to clean up, to return to ordinary life, to be available and present and accounted for when the call finally came in at noon. The 14-hour silence is not evidence of guilt. It is a fact that deserves to be examined with the same precision as every other confirmed fact in this case, and the question it raises, why 14 hours, has never received a public answer. Take the ransom theory off the table. Remove it entirely. Set aside the notes, the Bitcoin demands, the deadlines. Look at only the physical evidence of what happened in that house. An immaculate interior, and a removal that left no evidence of confusion or search. 3 access points propped open using pots from the property's own patio, grabbed in the dark without hesitation by hands that knew exactly where they were. A security gate that cannot be forced from the outside, opened somehow from the inside. A backpack shaped like it contained something flat and folded rather than the tools of captivity. Medication left on the counter that any person planning to keep a hostage alive would have taken without exception. That physical evidence describes an operation planned and executed by someone with intimate knowledge of that property, not surveillance knowledge built from watching a house from the street. Interior knowledge, patio knowledge. They're the kind that comes from being inside a home and absorbing its layout through repetition until the placement of the flower pots and the weight of the security gate and the path from the back door to the front are encoded without conscious effort. When you remove the ransom motive, the list of people who could have executed this operation with that level of interior knowledge becomes very short. Not a stranger who identified a vulnerable target through public information about Savannah Guthrie's salary. Someone who had been inside that house. Someone who knew the patio. Someone who knew which door the security gate opened from. Someone who knew the Saturday night routine and when the neighborhood would be quiet and when Nancy would be alone and exactly when the window would open. And the ransom notes become part of the staging when the ransom motive is removed. They are the story built on top of the crime to redirect the investigation. The insider details they contain, the Apple Watch location, the floodlight damage, were not proof that the kidnapper was sophisticated. They were proof that the author of those notes had access to crime scene information, either because they were there or because they were close enough to someone who was to receive that information before it was public. And the geography of every ransom communication, the Bitcoin ATM near Annie and Tommaso's route, the Google search from Tucson on the same night as the physical surveillance, the ransom text to Tommaso's personal phone, and the February 11th note addressed to Annie and Cameron, keeps drawing a circle around the same 4-mile radius that has been at the center of this investigation since the first morning. The ransom theory was the first framework placed on this case. It was built in the first phone call before any evidence was examined. It became the template for everything that followed. And the medication on the kitchen counter, 5 seconds, right there, left behind, is what ends it. Because a person who plans a kidnapping for ransom and then leaves the medication behind is not planning a kidnapping for ransom. They are planning something else. And every other piece of physical evidence in this case, the backpack, the flower pots, the immaculate house, the impassable gate that opened anyway, points toward what that something else actually was. Someone took Nancy Guthrie from her home. They knew that property from the inside. They moved through it without disturbing a single object. They brought what you bring when the person is not coming back alive. They left what you only leave behind when keeping someone alive was never the point. And they built a ransom story on top of it because a stranger kidnapping for money is an investigation that looks outward. What this evidence actually describes is an investigation that should have been looking inward from the first morning. The ransom theory may be dead. The investigation is not. The genetic genealogy is running on 2 DNA profiles recovered from this case. 2 family trees being built from public ancestry databases, 2 independent chains that need only one distant relative to close on a name. The science that identified the Golden State Killer after 4 decades is running on this case right now. The cell tower data from January 23rd, the night of the dress rehearsal when the suspect believed they were invisible, is being cross-referenced against February 1st. That night they did not take precautions. Their phone was in their pocket. Their car was on the road. That data is in the possession of investigators who know exactly what they are looking for. The Uber dash cam footage from Nancy's 5:32 p.m. ride on January 31st is being analyzed frame by frame. And the route she traveled, the vehicles around her Uber, the streets between her home and Annie's house. Whatever was near that Uber that evening is in that footage, and investigators are looking at every frame. And the interior DNA from Nancy's home, the mixed biological profile that the sheriff described as the most critical forensic thread in this investigation, is at a laboratory where the processing snag has been confirmed and cleared. When that result comes back, it will tell investigators more about who was inside that house than anything the crime scene revealed visually. The science does not care about the ransom theory. It does not care what framework the investigation was built around in the first hours. It processes the evidence and produces a result. And the result it is building toward is a name. May the name of the person or people who knew that patio well enough to grab the flower pots in the dark, who knew that property well enough to move through an immaculate house to a specific bedroom and back out without disturbing a single object, who brought a backpack shaped like a tarp because they already knew that keeping Nancy Guthrie alive was never part of what they had planned. The medication is on the counter. The science is running. And the question this community has been circling for over 2 months now has a cleaner answer than the ransom theory ever provided. This was not a stranger who saw an opportunity. This was someone who built a plan, someone who knew that house, someone who left the pills behind because the pills were never going to matter. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 60 days. Her family cannot grieve. And they can only wait, and the only thing standing between this case fading into the background and the right person seeing the information that changes everything is the attention this community keeps putting on it. Share this video. Not for this channel, for Nancy. Every share puts this case in front of someone who might know something. Every like tells the algorithm this story matters and keeps it reaching new eyes. Every subscriber means the next update finds people who are paying attention when it matters most. The person or people responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie are counting on the world moving on. On 60 days becoming 90, and 90 becoming a year, and a year becoming the kind of case that disappears from the conversation. Do not let that happen. Subscribe, like, share. It's because the attention this case keeps is the pressure the investigation keeps, and Nancy Guthrie deserves every bit of both until she is brought home.